It's nice to see you all. We're not having any technical difficulties. Judith is doing great. Oh boy, now you hear an amplified voice. Thanks so much for coming. So my story begins many years ago when I heard good things about Judith as a body worker. And then I dared to go to her myself, and I was very, I don't know, moved, satisfied, delighted to go into that world of healing and feeling and learning in that non-linear way, because I didn't really know what was going on except that I felt better in a way that wasn't linear. Like maybe I felt much better. That would be a better way to say it. And I had, interesting reflections of it. And I went about my life, and which included doing improv, which I'm not doing right now. Could I have a word, please? No. And at one of those shows, Judith Sullivan came up to me, which was very nice, because here was a person who'd done good work in my life, and I thought she was going to say something nice like, "Good to see you, Larry." And she said, "I'd like you to teach me stand-up comedy." It's just really not anything I thought she would say to me, which is fine. And I mean, why do you have to have everybody say what you expect? So, like many things, you know how people say, "Hey, let's get together, let's do something," and then it doesn't happen. I thought that was how that was going to go. And then we had a pandemic. And then I was kind of alone with my Zoom, and I thought of people from my past who had kind of reached out to me, and I thought, why not? So I called her, and emailed her, did all those things, and said, "Hey, if not now, when?" And she said, "Now, let's do it." So we started working together, and what I discovered right away was that she had a collection of stories from her work and from her life that were wonderful stories. So there wasn't really a need for me to fit the square Judith peg into the round stand-up comedian hole, although that would have been a delight. But there were these great stories. And so she worked with me, and we did these Zoom shows, and we did a few of them, and then at the end of that, she said, "Okay, well, send me on to the next director. I'm ready. Where do I train? How do I get better?" And I didn't know the answer. And within a day, the thought came, what about me? Thank you for that affirmation. And so I suggested we do a public show, and I would direct her. And this is a different place, this is a different world. And so one thing led to the next. None of us could have predicted we'd be in Alice in Wonderland land, with live bats, with special lights, with friends trying to figure out how to create a worldwide internet link. How's it going, Ray?
We're ready. It's ready. I'm just checking to see if Judith's ready, and we're ready to go.
I was not vamping and covering for this, believe me. This was an important story for me to tell, although I had an excuse. So here we are. This is the second night. We opened last night. We close tonight. This is there may be some producers in the house here, and we may entertain offers, but don't worry about that yet, because I want you just to experience this without concern for where it's going. So here are Judith's stories. Anybody know the name of the story? The show? Listen with Your Spleen. Of course. Are you listening with your spleen? Tune in to your spleen right now, please. And you're listening, here she is, Judith Sullivan.
Thank you, Larry. That wasn't quite right. When he said, "Let's do some stand-up comedy," I went, "Stand-up comedy? I don't want to do stand-up comedy. Who said that?" So that's how we turned it into stories. But I was sitting out here watching Nick play the accordion, and And it looked to me like he was touch typing on 2 different kinds of typewriters. So we're just like, how do you do that? So I do have some stories, and all of them are mine except one, which is my brother-in-law Stu's. And it's such a fun story, and I read it in his book, You're Not Having Any Fun Until You Get Your Feet Wet. And then I called him and I said, could I use this? Because I really there's so much to it. So that'll be somewhere in the show. So it's 1968 and I'm 22 and I've moved to Washington, D.C. I've graduated from Kent State University in speech pathology and audiology. And I have a boyfriend, Doug, who lives in the next apartment. And Doug is fun. He's really fun, he's really smart. We do different things than I've ever done with anyone. Interestingly, he didn't have a college education. My parents had sort of strongly intimated that I should only date men who had a college education, but I've never had so much fun. And Doug was in Washington for a short time because he's in the Navy, and he was doing a deep sea diving course. It's the kind where you have a great big, brass helmet and you go way deep and you learn how to do salvage and wreckage and find bombs and defuse them, little things like that. And it's an intense class. So he graduated and his parents were in California, so I went to his graduation. And it was in Anacostia, part of DC I wasn't familiar with. I got turned around about 3 times. But I got there just in the nick of time. And it was a nice graduation. The man next to me turned to leave at the end, and I grabbed him and I said, tell me how to get to Wilson Bridge. And he goes, oh, it's easy, take 2 rights and a left. I said, thank you. Good. And then I found Doug, gave him a great big hug, got in the car, and took off, got out of the post where he was. And then I took my first right, and then I took my second right. It looked a little strange, but I kept going. And then it turned into nothing. It was black. It was road, because I could feel it was road. It wasn't anything else, blacktop. It was a moonless night. So there were no lights. There were no lines. There were no cars. There was nothing. And I just thought, well, if I keep driving straight, I'll run into something. And I didn't. Okay, I'll turn around and I'll find the road in and I will road out. And I couldn't find that either. So then I went to the right, there's nothing. To the left, I was actually getting scared. I didn't know where I was, how to get out of where I was. It was about 10 minutes worth on this big black place. And then there's in my rearview mirror, there's a little red light. It's like, for the first time in my life, I'm happy to see a little red light. Usually it means I'm getting a ticket for speeding. And the officer gets out of his car. I roll down my window. Young lady, do you know where you are? No, I don't know where I am. I probably wouldn't be here if I knew where I was. And he says, well, I'll tell you where you are. You are on the runway at Andrews Air Force Base. This is where military planes and Air Force One comes in, and you are just lucky that there is no plane landing right now. I said, yes, I know. Thank you. No wonder I was feeling a little nervous and scared. So I said, can you tell me how to get out? Yes, follow me. And how to get to Wilson Bridge? Yes. So got out of Andrews Air Force Base, made another right, then a left, was on Wilson Bridge, and I got home safely. Doug went back to California where he married his fiancée, which I didn't know he had. And this is the story I use for Two Truths and a Lie is I almost got killed riding around in my car on the runway at Andrews Air Force Base. body work, and I teach people how to work with organs. And this was 2006. And I was on my way to Reno, Nevada to teach a class on how to work with the organs. I had my friends own this ranch, and it's like a fox hunting ranch, so they have a lot of horses and a lot of dogs, but they don't have foxes since there aren't any foxes in Reno, Nevada. So they hunt coyotes. And coyotes are very different than foxes. They don't try to kill them. Actually, the coyote is in charge of the hunt. Because when the coyote is tired of running, it turns around and starts barking at the dogs, and they go, so that's the kind of hunt it is. It's well known. It's a well-respected hunt. And I'm doing it there at this ranch. And the other owner, Lynn, and her partner, Chrisanne, who's the vet, with their friends all have a big dinner on Thursday nights. So we all got together for dinner, and it's usually a lively affair. But this particular night, it was rather somber, and the reason why is because someone brought their horse Duchess to Chrisanne to either put down or maybe she would live. But Chrisanne was pretty sure she was going to have to be put down. She gave her antibiotics and painkillers, but she told us, I'm going to have to put her down. And actually, she left the dinner to go down, to put her down, and she came back up and said, I couldn't do it. Duchess just looked at me straight in the eye and was chewing on a piece of straw. So I'm going to have to get up in the middle of the night, I guess. So we continued eating. Chrisanne left the room, and then someone else comes up and says, Duchess is really doing badly. So I said, could I go down and see Duchess? And I did that. I mean, a horse is just another body. It's a different kind of a body, but it's a body. And I'm curious, and I wanted to see what this horse felt like. So we went down, and I went down with Lynn, one of the owners of the ranch, and I put my hands on Duchess. And Duchess was stone cold. I went, oh my gosh, this is where her heart is setting in. And then I put my hands on her nose, her nasal bones, because I wanted to feel the cranial rhythm. There's no cranial rhythm that I could detect. I sat there for a while just looking at Duchess, and she was looking back at me, and she had these big limpid brown eyes, and we fell in love. Any good story has a love interest. So I thought to myself, I really don't know what I'm doing with horses. I don't know if all horses have cranial rhythm the same kind that people do. So I went over to my friend Gail's horse, Daphne, and I put my hands on her. She was warm. And I put my hands on her nose because there were big bones, and oh yeah, she's got cranial rhythm. Went back to Duchess, put my hands on Duchess, and she felt warmer. And Lynn said, Judith, I think Duchess is warmer. And I said, yeah, I do too. And then I put my hands on her nasal bones, and there was just the slightest amount of cranial rhythm. I was like, well, that's nice. Then everybody came down from dinner. We all just loved on Duchess, put our hands on her. She's a beautiful horse. And Chrisanne comes down and says, Judith, I'm putting her down tonight. She's not going to make it. I said, I understand. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Chrisanne calls me and said, Duchess is still alive. I went, great. I said, can we use her as an after-school project? And she said, sure. So I talked to my organ class, and we're learning where the organs are in the human body. And it's amazing how many people, even medical professionals, don't know where certain organs are. And I'm always surprised when I watch people do the Pledge of Allegiance and they put their hand under their armpit. That is not where the heart is. The heart is in the middle of the chest with just a little bit more on the left. But I don't say anything to them. And the spleen. The spleen is another mystical organ that nobody knows where it is. And I would say to people, put your hand on your spleen, and all the students in the class would go. So after that, I said, close your eyes and put your hand on your spleen. So your spleen is a very important organ, and it's right here, okay? It's right under your ribs, snugged in next to your kidney, and also it comes to the side a little bit. So that's where the spleen is. So we're all learning about the organs, and 4 of the people in the class said that they'd like to do the after-school project, so then we had to get an anatomy book of a horse. And their organs are right under their spine. It's so interesting that their organs are, and they're tall. It's like, how can you reach these organs? So the first day we went over and we just all wanted to get to know Duchess. And so we just were there with her, just getting to know her. And all of us did different things. There were people who did Reiki, other people did healing touch, other people were doing massage therapy, some people were doing visceral work or cranial work. So it's a large animal. It's a lot of space. You can do all of these things. So that was the first day, getting to know Duchess. And the second day after class, we went over, and she was in her stall. And so I went in and I said, all right, one of the things you can do is you can pull her tail. So you pull her tail, and you take out the looseness, and then you add some tension. And that affects all of the vertebrae and the dura and the spinal cord and all the nerve roots that come out. So it really affects her whole body. So I held on to it until she took a deep breath, started chewing and farted, and that's the sign that she was finished with that particular technique. People do that too. So we all walked out of the stall and gathered around, and we're just talking, and Duchess does an interesting thing. She turns around, walks to the back of the stall, backs up, and sticks her tail over the door. Right. Do it again. So Bodhi, one of the students, said to me, do you think she wants us to do it again? I went, yes, I do. So Bodhi takes the tail, adds a little tension, and Duchess adds tension back on the other side, pulling Bodhi right into the door. So all of us were like a train, hooking onto Bodhi to be sort of a counterweight for this large animal over here. We held that position for about 10 minutes. It was amazing. And then she started chewing, took a deep breath and farted, and we knew we were finished. On the third day, the other thing I did is her water bag was there. And I said, Duchess, I think you should drink water. I mean, that's what humans do when they're sick. They're supposed to drink water, right? So it's the difference. So I said, Duchess, drink the water. Duchess, this will be good for you. Drink the water. So there was no drinking water. So the next day, we got there, and she's lying on the ground outside, and I go, oh no, Duchess is dead. And Duchess was not dead, because I learned that horses can sleep lying down as well as standing up. So Duchess got up, and we did all the things that we were doing, and we were looking for organs, and I was really interested in her belly because it was so hard. And she had peritonitis, and sepsis was part of the whole process that was happening, and I wanted to get it moving because you have to get things moving in order to heal. So I worked there. Everybody else was doing healing touch and Reiki, and we all had a good time. And then Duchess decided she wanted to walk over to the corral where the other horses were. So we walked over there, and there's a water trough. I said, Duchess, drink the water. She turned and walked away. I went and got her, said, Duchess, I want you to drink the water. She looked at me, and then drank the water. I was really glad to know that my mother control voice was in good stead. So on the last day, it's a 4-day class, and some people leave early. There were about, I think, 3 of us there, and I just wanted to walk Duchess and then pause. I didn't want to walk too much because it's interesting, if you do too much, when a body is trying to heal, there's not enough energy for the healing work. So I walked her to get movement in, and then I would stop and we'd all talk for a couple minutes, and I'd walk her a little bit more. And then we said goodbye to Duchess. And the next day, my friend Gail took me to lunch with Chrisanne and Lynn. We're having lunch, and Chrisanne says to me, Judith, I'm discharging Duchess tomorrow. It's amazing what you can do when you don't know what you're doing. There's a physical therapist that referred a client to me. Her name was Julia. She had had a bad fall on her sacrum and then her head, had a concussion, had been out of work for 2 or 3 months. And the physical therapist sent her to me because I did cranial work, and the physical therapist had met me in a cranial class. And she thought, well, maybe this will work because we're not getting anywhere. So in about 3 sessions of cranial work, she was back at work part-time. And then everything came to a full stop. Nothing else was happening. Nothing was changing. So I tried to look at, was there a part of it, we'd pick up her arm to see if it needed some unwinding. Did it get caught in the fall? And that was blocking all of her energy, and that wasn't it. I checked her head, that wasn't it. I had her sit up, and I put my hand on her head and on her back. Nothing happened. I had her stand up, and I put my hand on her hips. And there was a direct downward trajectory. What do you do with a direct downward trajectory? I lowered her to the ground. That's what I did. I did that about 3 times. And then she got on the table, and she got cold, nauseous, and dizzy. So that took her into a type of a shock in her body. And it took about 20 minutes until it changed. She came in the next week, and my friend Manta, my colleague and wonderful physical therapist, I said, Manta, would you just put your hands on her hips, and tell me what you feel? And Manta goes, oh, Judith, there's a downward strong pull. And I went, thank you, I'm not crazy. So then the 2 of us would lower her to the ground, which was much easier than just me lowering her to the ground. And we did that 2 or 3 times. She'd get on the table, get dizzy, cold, nauseous. That happened over time once, and I just felt, I've got to get up higher because she's got to go down lower. So I got up on my table and held her under her arms, and we slowly lowered her to the ground. Get on the table. The nauseousness and dizziness and cold is not lasting as long each time we do this. And quite honestly, I know a lot more now about when that happens and what it is. But every time she would come in, I'd ask her about any other falls she had because it just wasn't right. There was something that just was a little off. You know, I asked her about falling out of a tree, falling off the jungle gym, falling off horses, falling on skis, skateboards, snowboards, anything. No, I can't think of anything. So she came in one day, we did the usual routine. I put my hands on her hips here, and I felt the downward trajectory, and I went to Manta saying, yeah, it's still there. Manta was standing in front of her. Then Manta put her hands on the hips and went, yep, downward trajectory was still there. We both took our hands off of her for a minute, and she goes straight down onto her knees. Julia, what did you do that for? Do what? Why did you fall down on your knees by yourself? Oh, I thought you were holding me. No, we weren't. Stand up a minute. She stood up. I put my hand on her hips. Looked at Manta. Manta put her hands on her hips, looked at me. And that was the end of the downward trajectory. Done. Put her on the table. No cold, no going through the shock routine. A couple weeks later, she just came in for, a tune-up. And I always start at the feet. I put my hands on her feet. And this time, my hands, of their own accord, flew off her feet. And what came out of my mouth was, Julia, when did you break all the bones in your feet? I always started by putting my hands on her feet. I was surprised to hear the words coming out of my mouth. And she goes, didn't I tell you? No, Julia, you did not say a word, as I'm looking at the chart, about breaking any bones in your feet. Oh, I broke all the bones in my feet. How did you do that, Julia? Well, I used to skydive. I used to jump from planes. And one day when I was jumping, my boyfriend landed a little bit before me, and he landed in barbed wire, and I was worried about him, and I wasn't watching the ground. And my feet slammed into the ground, and then I fell to my knees. What did you do then, Julia? Oh, well, I grabbed up my chute and I ran over to see if I could help him. And then what? Well, we went to the emergency room and he got stitched up because he'd gotten cut pretty badly. And then we went out to lunch for dinner. Then, well, I went home and I went to bed. And I woke up the next day and my feet were all swollen up. Did you call 911? No, George Washington Hospital was just down the street, so I walked there. And then they sent me down to X-ray. And when I got to X-ray, the doctor there yelled at me for not being in a wheelchair. This was a really interesting case. She did not have that stored in her mind under fall. She had it stored under jump. So now that's one of the questions I ask. Have you ever had any bad falls? Did you ever jump out of an airplane? But seriously, there's a little disconnect with her that had not come up at all before. And the shock that she went through is because she did not go through shock at the time when she landed. And that shock got stored in her body, and I am finding quite often that shock is in the spleen. So she had another disconnect too when she came in for her last session, and I said, Julie, did you get your check from the insurance company to pay us? She goes, oh yeah, I got the check. And, I bought a ticket to see my parents and I bought them a television set. So she has a storage problem. I think she's storing that in things I want to do now versus things I should pay for immediately.
How are your feet?
My feet are very good, thank you. I have not jumped out of any airplanes lately. Let's see, there was Duchess, and there's Julia, and I love Star Trek. I have loved it since the beginning. I love the first show. I love the takeoffs of the show. I like Second Generation. I like Deep Space Nine. I like all the movies. And from the beginning, one of the cool things was that you could see where humanity could be without racism and sexism and classism. Everybody just worked together to do their job. Not that they didn't argue. That's normal. The other thing I really liked is technology. I liked the tricorders. I liked the cloaking. I liked the replicators. I liked the phasers. And I liked the force fields. And I liked the shields. I can still remember Scotty going, shields down 50%. Shields about to go. Because when the ship was attacked too much, the shields couldn't protect it anymore. Much like our immune systems. But the replicators, you could go and say, I'd like a steak medium rare with some mushrooms and some green beans and French Merlot 86. And it would appear right there. Of course, these days you wonder if it's organic. And what else? Phasers. You could set it to stun at different degrees. It doesn't have to kill. I think that's a very good possibility. Cloaking. The ships would cloak. Don't we wish we had cloaking? Harry Potter's cloak, at least. I like that. But force fields. I want to talk about force fields because I felt one in my practice. And it was an experience I haven't had since. Little boy, Dougie, is 5 years old, was autistic, and was in toilet train, came to see me with his father. And when you're autistic, you have relationship difficulties, looking at people. There's problems with your body. There's a lot of excess movement, repetitive behavior, just some basic difficulties. And so his father sat there, because he got on the table and it was just all over the place. And I work with kids that are all over the place. That doesn't bother me. But his father started singing. Our house is a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy because of you. And he calmed down to a certain degree. He was still wiggling around, but 50% of that was just quiet. And now I can sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for 45 minutes when I'm working with a wiggly child. But back to Dougie. He was on the table, I was evaluating him, and I moved up through his body. I got to his head, and I got to his parietal bones, and then I got to his temporal bones, which is, they're connected to the ears. And I just did a gentle pull, and I know a lot of kids hate having their ears pulled, so I was very gentle. And suddenly, he stopped moving. Everything stopped. The father stopped singing. As he closely, carefully put his hands on top of mine and guided my hands up and in. Then he put his hands down. I followed my hands up and in until I met a force field. This force field is sort of like if you have two magnets and you try to put the negative poles together and you feel that field. Only this was also brilliant. It was brilliant at the same time. And I just sat there with it. And there was like total quiet in the room. It was raining outside. It had the feeling of this expansion of space. We just sat there. For about 15 minutes, I sat there with this force field, paying attention to it. It started to dissolve. In about 15 minutes, it was beginning to dissolve. And so they got up and left and walked out of the room, and I thought, I just cured autism. No, I didn't. But you know what? He came back the next time, about 2 weeks later, and he was potty trained. And that's important for a 5-year-old, and it's really important for a 5-year-old's parents. Story about Sophia. She's my Spanish teacher. I've taken a lot of Spanish classes, and I have a brain that's like Teflon when it comes to Spanish. This is my third one with Sophia, but it was my favorite one. Because you get into a lazy boy chair, you put on earphones, and then you listen to the lesson of the day. Then you get up and you play kids games in Spanish and sing kids songs. La cucaracha, ya no tiene cuernos. Teflon. La cucaracha, no fumar, whatever. Okay. And I practiced. I have practiced this every day, this song. It's a Teflon brain. So one day in class, we'd have a break. It was about a 3-hour class, so we had a break and we'd meet in the break room. And Sophia and I got to talking. I told her I was a body worker, and she said, "Oh, I could have used you. When I was younger, I was in a horrible accident in Latin America, and I was in the hospital in a coma for 6 months. And I got out of it, and the doctor said I wouldn't be able to use my arms or legs, and I'd probably never walk again." And I said, "Oh no." And I started massaging my arms. I worked my arms, and I worked my legs, and I worked my body, and I am walking. That was not going to happen to me. I was impressed. A few weeks later, we met again. We do this every week, but this week, she was just holding her head like this. And I said, "Sophia, what's the matter?" She goes, "Oh, I have this horrible toothache. I went to the dentist, and he couldn't find anything, but he's going to do a root canal in a couple of days." I said, "Can I put my hand on your face?" "Sure." So I put my hand, just resting it on her face, and her head twisted around like that. I immediately took my hands off, and she said, "What did you do to me?" I said, "I didn't do anything to you. I didn't do a thing. But I think you need to see me. I do a kind of body work that I understand sometimes when this happens, what it might mean. That might be an emotional thing going on. You don't know what I do, but that's what I do. So here's my card." She called me the next day and said, "I don't know why, but I'm making an appointment with you." I said, "That's good, but please bring someone, a friend of yours who speaks both English and Spanish," because I was afraid if she did have some sort of an emotional, energetic release that I wouldn't be able to understand what she said. And the person she brought I knew because we'd been in a meditation class together. So that was really lucky. So I evaluated Sophia. I started with her feet like I usually do, and I worked up and I found most of the congestion was in her upper chest and in her head. And I sat down and put my hands on her head, and her whole body started writhing and she started moaning. Everything from the solar plexus down. That was still. I was like, my hands flew off and I said, "Are you okay?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Do you want me to stop?" "No." All right. So that was a little scary. I didn't know what was going on. So I thought, I think I'll move to her chest. And I put one hand here and one hand back. I was sitting there. And again, her body started this awful writhing. It was like someone was torturing her, but this part of her wasn't moving. And again, I stopped. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "Do you know what this is?" "No." I went back to her head. I held her head, and suddenly a scream dropped down in my mind. And in this scream, I saw this beautiful young woman in a hospital bed with long black hair going all the way down her back, being orally raped serially. And I went, okay, this makes sense. I think I'll tell her, and then she'll know why all of this is happening. But I couldn't open my mouth. I could talk to her, but I couldn't. I wanted to. I really wanted to. Okay, well, I'll just wait till the end of the session. So I kept working from her head to her chest, back to her head. It took about 2 hours until her body, there was a sense of quietude in her body. She sat up and said, "Wow, I can't remember feeling so relaxed." And I am sitting there going, part of me is in the back of the room going, I know, call on me, I know. But I couldn't call on myself. I thought, okay, I'll tell her tomorrow. So the next day she calls me and says, "Judith, I can't tell you how I felt. I left your house, I walked up and down the street, I couldn't believe how relaxed and wonderful my body felt. And I could feel the air on my skin, and it just felt so good." And I went home and I took a nap for a couple hours. And then I went out to dinner with my husband and some friends, came home, went to bed. 2:30 in the morning, I woke up and I ran to the bathroom and I started vomiting and vomiting and vomiting. I couldn't believe what I was vomiting. It was all this white, milky, thick stuff. I didn't know what it was because there was nothing from my dinner in it. I'm glad you're feeling better, Sophia. I'll see you tomorrow. So the next day, in class, it was the last day of class, and Brian comes in to sell us the Spanish tape so that we can practice at home. And I buy the tapes, and I don't practice at home. And Brian says, you all don't know Sophia, but she used to be a model. And there's a picture of her over her fireplace. And she's lying on this white rug. And she has this long black hair all the way down her back. I've learned so much from this. I resisted the learning, but I learned a lot. I learned that you can release trauma without having to remember it, without having to bring it to consciousness. And that's grace. And grace is wonderful. Sitting for a while. Everybody stand up for a minute. Okay, take your right hand and go up and down and up. Follow me. If you don't follow me, you're going to be in trouble. Up and down. I want you to memorize this. Really, I want you to memorize this. Now you're going to have to move away because you're going to use your left hand and you're going to go down, out, and up. And you don't want to bump into the person next to you. Down, out, and up. Down, out, and up. Down, out, and up. You got this? Memorized? Okay, let's put them together. So I'll go slow. One. This one's automatic. And the other one you have to think of. You can do this, come on. Left hand just goes down, or the right hand just goes down and up. That's all it does. Come on. All right. Okay, let's sit down now. I just wanted to get a little movement in. So my brother-in-law, Stu, loved fishing, and it just was magical in his whole life. No matter, because he kept following that love of his, he found fishing when he was in the Army, during the war. He found fishing everywhere. But this is when he was 10 years old. It's 1945. The war is just over. There's no money. It's winter. And he and Ernie and Paul and Rob want to go ice fishing. But they have no tip-ups. Tip-ups are what you use in ice fishing that pop up. They're attached to the line when you've caught a fish. Has a red flag on it so that you know if you have a fish or not. And they cost about $1 a piece. And that was a lot of money because it's about $15 in our money. And they each wanted 10 of them. That's a lot. So they had to figure out how to make the tip-ups with what they were going to make it. They had to figure out where they were going to go fishing and when. Well, that was easy. They were going to go to the reservoir because they had the best fishing. Of course, it was illegal to go to the reservoir and fish there unless you paid off Otto. Unless you bribed Otto, then you could fish, but they didn't have enough money for that. So they had to decide, when are we going to do this? Christmas Eve day. Maybe he'll have the day off. Maybe he'll be buying presents. Maybe he'll be wrapping presents. So that was the day. But this, getting the tip-ups together, was an interesting process. God, guys, what are we going to do? How are we going to make the tip-ups? We can't use wood or twigs or things that'll break. Oh, I know. My mom wears girdles, and there's stays in the girdles. We can take those stays, and they bend, and they won't break. That's right, but how are we going to get 20 girdles? Well, Monday is washing day, and all the girdles are hung out on a line. Oh, yeah, that's it. So that's what they did. Stu was the fastest. He would get on his bike, grab a girdle, take it to Ernie, and then go get another one. Ernie would take the stays out, and they would go and get the girdles and take out the stays and return the girdles. And Paul made sure his mom didn't look out the window because she was the curious kind. So they got their stays, and Ernie very happily donated his red underwear, which he hated, for the flags. So that's how they got their stays. But I have to say, I'm just imagining those women putting on their girdles and going, oh, that feels better. I think I've lost weight. But then I was telling this story to my daughter Jade. You better be listening, Jade. And she says, Mom, what's a girdle? She's a millennial. I said, what do you mean? What's a girdle? What's a girdle? Oh, well, a girdle is medieval Spanx. So, millennials on down don't know what a girdle is. So they got on their bikes the day of Christmas Eve day, and they went over and they snuck into the reservoir the way they knew how to sneak into the reservoir. And they were very quiet, and they drilled their holes, and they placed their tip-ups, and the fish were biting so fast they only had time to drill 20 holes instead of 40. And they were taking the fish and sticking them in the bike baskets, and another tip-up would come out. They grabbed the fish and they put it in the basket, and they were getting so many fish. And all of a sudden, from the edge of the reservoir, comes Otto. You boys, get out of here. I have told you so many times you're not allowed to fish here. I'm going to have you arrested this time. So the boys, they grab their fish, whatever they have left, and they hop on their bikes and they turn around because they don't know how fast Otto is running, and he's running, and they see him sort of stumble on one of the holes and fly up in the air and land and bounce, and all of his legs and arms are flying all over the place. So they guess they didn't have to rush. Otto was slowly getting up. He probably needed a few aspirin that day and the next day, and maybe the day after that, but he was okay. That night, all 4 families had fish for dinner, and no one asked where they came from. different ways of healing that we have no idea about. Jane came to see me, and I asked her history. Yes, vaginal birth, she was the 6th child, but she'd had horrible asthma. She was born in the late 40s. So she was in the hospital a long time after she was born, and even as a baby and a little girl, she was in the hospital quite often, in the emergency room. Her father, they were very poor. Her father worked construction, and part of the construction team was a Native American that they called the Old Indian. And he was always giving them advice about how he could keep his family healthy. And one of those things is, well, you cut an onion in half and you stick a half in every room. And kids don't get sick. Kids didn't get sick. They said, Dad, can we take these stinky onions out of here? None of our friends want to come over. Do your friends get sick? Yeah. Are you getting sick? No. The onions are staying. So one day, out of frustration, he asked the Old Indian, what can I do for my daughter? She has this awful asthma condition. She's 5 years old. We've got to do something. The Indian says, well, you have to find a skunk. And then you have to have the skunk sprayer. As a parent, we'll do anything for our kids, won't we? That's how he felt. So one day after church, the 2 of them were in his truck, and they were doing an errand. They were getting milk at 7-Eleven. They're driving along, and he sees a skunk in the field. He slams on the brakes. He jumps out of his car. He runs across the field, and he grabs the skunk, and he brings it back and sprays his daughter. She had no more asthma. Was it because of that? Or was it, as the mother thought, because she had ruined her good Sunday go to meeting coat? Or was it, and its time just run out? This is the Twilight Zone. I just can't imagine that. I just cannot. But I guess I could. My friend Robin does some work for the Wildlife Federation. If anybody finds a baby bat, they give it to her, and she takes care of it and nurtures it and then lets it go back to nature. And I was visiting her one day when she had received a baby bat. It was a couple days old, and she was sitting at the dining room table, and she had a little bowl of goat's milk and a paintbrush, and she was dipping the paintbrush in the goat's milk and dipping it into the web of her thumb. And the little bat would look it up. It's really cute little bat. And I was just entranced. And so I don't know what possessed me, but I just took my hand, here's the bat, and I put it about 18 inches above the bat and just stood there. And all of a sudden I felt this buzzing in my hand, which I went, oh, that's the echolocation that the bats use to find, because they're blind, that's what they use to find their food, to avoid objects. And then 30 seconds later, I felt this strong, sharp pain in my palm. And I thought, well, that could be the pain of the bat losing its mother. Because bats, when they're born, immediately start nursing, and they keep nursing until they can fly. So the mothers fly around with the bat nursing on them all the time. I mean, at night. They don't fly during the day, but at night they do that, and sometimes the bats fall off, or sometimes the mother gets killed, and that's how the bats are found. So I met up with Robin a few weeks later, and I said, Robin, how's the bat? And she says, well, Boris is doing well. And I interrupted her and I went, but Boris is a girl. Now, how on earth would I know that Boris is a girl? The things that come out of my mouth. And she goes, well, Judith, we didn't know that then. We did not know Boris was a girl until after we named her, Boris. So Boris was doing well, so Robin has a bat cage where she takes bats and teaches them how to fly, because I've been there helping her in the bat cage. And she had taken Boris, and Boris was flying well and getting ready to leave. And she was outside one night and she saw these bats just flying around and around, and she goes, they're waiting for Boris. So she got Boris, and Boris took off and went with the bats. And every now and then, she would go out and feel just a little tap here, and a bat would take off. So Boris was doing a little touchdown on her shoulder. We just have no idea about bats. We have no idea. Several months later, I had another experience with Boris. I was getting a treatment. I was on the treatment table, and my practitioner said, Judith, there's a boulder in your chest. Can I remove it? And I went, yeah. So she removed it, and what I saw was a gaping wound. And I said, well, what can you put on this gaping wound? And she says, well, you'll have to ask the universe. That was her job, but I asked the universe. And what arrived was not what I was expecting, but it was a cloud of bats coming toward me. And I'm like, bats? Is this a good thing? Oh my God. And then a bat came forward directly and said, Judith, I'm Boris. Boris, I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for coming. But I was really uncomfortable and scared at first. And she said, yes, that's how I felt when you put your hand on top of me. So all of her bat friends just lay down on top of the wound that was in my chest and covered that wound, and it healed well. If you ever get a chance to touch a bat, they're an amazing, I've never felt anything like it. They're just really special. But that's Boris. I was really surprised that Boris showed up here when I came yesterday. It's like, who knew? My mother and I didn't have a great relationship. I don't think we had a relationship, but she was really excellent at taking good care of me. We were fed well. We had good grades. We had good manners. She made clothes for us that were very lovely, but we never talked about anything. I always felt misunderstood, angry, sad, sort of depressed. There just was not much going on. But on the other hand, she was born in 1922, and I don't think many women in that age group really knew how to relate to children. They were under very strict guidelines of what they were supposed to do. Like, don't pick up the child if it cries. She's trying to manipulate you. So one example, I was in my 20s. I mean, I had a lot when I was a kid, but this one, I was in my 20s. My friend Diane calls me. Judith, what have you done? I haven't done anything. No, what have you done? I haven't done anything. Well, I was at my mother's and I was reading the Christmas letter that your mother sends out every year. And I went, yeah, I haven't gotten mine yet. She says, well, you're not in it. I said, I'm not in it? No. Your mother and father are in it. Their dog is in it. Your sister is in it. Your sister's dog is in it. Your sister's children are in it. And you're not in it. So what have you done? I don't know. I haven't seen them in a long time. I haven't done anything. And then it hit me. I went from a speech therapist to something like a massage therapist. And in North Carolina, there were massage parlors on every corner. And they were embarrassed to tell their friends that I was doing something like massage when there were massage parlors around. So that's just an example of no communication, not saying, tell me about this massage thing that you're doing. Where are you doing it? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it? So that part of the conversation never happened. So when she was about 85, she was in assisted living because of Alzheimer's. And I would go down and visit her about once every 3 months because I lived in Virginia. She lived in North Carolina. And I was teaching a lot, so it was all I could do to get there about once every 3 months. But when I go, I would try to take something that she remembered. So when we were kids, they would have their cocktail hour while Nancy and I, my sister, we would have dinner in the kitchen, but they always played music. They had musicals, but all the time it was Mitch Miller in the game. All the time. So I took CDs of Mitch Miller, and we'd go down and sing Mitch Miller songs. And you know this song. Sing with me. I'm Mitch Miller. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. So she would love it. She remembered every song, every word. She didn't always remember my name, but this just tells you so much about music and how important it is. And she would say, oh, thank you, this is the best day. I can't remember being this happy. So we would play these songs when I would go down. When she was about 91, just before she died, I went down there and her hand had tetany, the muscles were all contracting, and her fingernails were cutting her palm. So I took this ball that the PT had left and I worked her hand to try to make enough space to put the ball in it so that the fingernails wouldn't cut her palm. And I got it in, and I sat there and I thought to myself, people in assisted living never get essential touch. And the skin is our need to be touched. It manifests as our need to be touched. So I sat there and I just stroked her arm. I stroked her arm. Both arms. Just sitting there. About 20 minutes. It was timeless. It was a timeless time with your mother. The aide came in and said, Ruth, it's time for lunch. Oh, Ruth, you're smiling. I kissed my mother goodbye, told her I loved her. I walked out of the room and down the hall about 10 steps. And then I turned around because I felt something. I felt something in my heart, and I paid attention to that, and it was a flame. And I paid attention to that flame. And then that flame suddenly exploded all around me, and I realized that that was the unconditional love, a direct experience of the unconditional love that was always there between my mother and me. The Lightest Touch by David White. Good poetry begins with the lightest touch. A breeze arriving from nowhere, a whispering, healing arrival, a word in your ear, a settling into things. Then, like a hand in the dark, it arrests the whole body, stealing you for revelation. In the silence that follows a great line, you can feel Lazarus deep inside even the laziest, most deadly afraid part of you lift up his hands and walk toward the light.